What happens when silence becomes a weapon? When the drums that once called for freedom start echoing inside the walls of the oppressor? Why was a plantation mistress found face down, with her tongue blackened and rotted? And who was the girl who never spoke, but made the entire house listen? This isn't just a ghost story. This is a reckoning buried in the soil of the American South. Are you ready to hear the morning beat? In the year of 1856, in the deep crook of Louisiana's river-veined land, there lay a cotton plantation where the soil drank more blood than rain. The estate was nameless on maps, referred to only in whispers by those who knew it, the kind of place where moss hung low and the air never truly cooled. Owned by the Beaumont family, its legacy was one of silence and sorrow, cultivated like the fields themselves. The nights on the Beaumont plantation were not quiet. Though no birds sang after dusk, and even the cicadas seemed to grow still, there came sounds from the marsh that fringed the western edge of the land, faint at first, like the soft rustle of wind through cane, then stronger, a low, rhythmic drumming that pulsed with the weight of something older than the house that presided over the fields. The whites said it was nonsense, frogs, thunder, tricks of echo, but those forced to bend and bleed under the sun knew better. They called it the morning beat, not music, not song, a warning, passed down in murmurs and stories carved with breath, a sound that meant the past had not forgotten. Among the enslaved was a girl not born of these lands. Amali was her name, tall, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes too sharp to belong to a girl so young. Taken from the Congo as a child, she had survived the Middle Passage in a silence so deep it had frightened even the crew. They'd whispered that she spoke with her mind, not her mouth. She had not said a word since stepping onto American soil. Her mother had died aboard the ship, clutching a bundle of carved bones and whispering names to the sea. They said she was a priestess of something old and foreign, something that made the cabin boys cross themselves and sleep in pairs. Amali had inherited nothing but her mother's silence and her eyes, which watched everything. The others on the plantation treated her with a kind of reverence. They did not understand her language, but they understood her presence. In the evenings, when the overseers had gone and the fires burned low, Amal would sit by the edge of the cane fields, drawing in the dirt with her fingers, circles, crosses, strange shapes no one dared to disturb. It was around her that the drumming grew loudest. The first time it happened, the children had screamed, claiming they saw shadows dancing in the sugarcane, moving without form or feet. The overseer beat them for lies, but their eyes stayed wide for days. The drumming returned, night after night, sometimes just past midnight, sometimes just before dawn. No one spoke of it near the house. It was a sound for the field hands, the kitchen workers, the old women with long memories and broken backs. And though the drumming never entered the white folks' ears, its weight hung heavy over the quarters. Some said it was the spirits of the dead, still tied to the land. Others believed it was the ancestors calling Amale back to her purpose, whatever it was. She never acknowledged it. Not with words, not with looks, but once, just once, an old man swore he saw her swaying slightly, her eyes closed, her fingers twitching to a beat only she could hear. Then came the night the sound stopped. The silence was worse than the drumming. It was thick, unnatural, as if the marsh itself was holding its breath. That night, a storm broke over the plantation, sudden and violent. Lightning struck the oldest pecan tree in the quarters, splitting it clean down the middle. The slaves gathered around it the next morning, seeing what looked like a figure burned into the bark. A woman, arms outstretched, mouth open in a scream. Amali stood at the edge of the crowd, her face unreadable. She did not look at the tree. She looked at the house, and the drumming, once so faint, returned louder than ever before. They said she rode in on a black carriage with windows sealed shut, as if the sun itself offended her. Mistress Catherine Beaumont, widow to the late Elias Beaumont, inherited the plantation like one inherits a curse, without choice and without grace. She arrived dressed in mourning black despite the southern heat, her gloved hands unmoved by sweat, her posture stiff with northern discipline. No one knew what had killed Elias, only that he had gone to bed with a full belly and was found the next morning cold and crooked, as if strangled by a dream. Catherine had not wept. Instead, She had sent word from Boston and arrived 3 weeks later with trunks of books, tinctures, and a silver crucifix large enough to be mistaken for a weapon. Rumors swelled in her shadow. Some said she had studied medicine. Others said she had spent time in an asylum after a nervous episode. All agreed on one thing. She feared no god she could not name. Her first act as mistress was to forbid music. No singing, no humming, no drumming of palms against thighs or buckets. Noise is the language of rebellion, she said. Silence is the discipline of the saved. She made a spectacle of the order, reading from a worn leather Bible beneath the sprawling oak that shaded the quarters, her voice clear and sharp as cut glass. The hands listened with downcast eyes, but the air itself seemed to tighten. For generations, music had been the only thread the enslaved could call their own. It carried memory, resistance, prayer. Now, with the wave of her gloved hand, it was banished like a sickness. When one boy was caught tapping a rhythm on the porch rail, Catherine had him dragged into the field and held down while the overseer broke every finger on his right hand. The boy did not cry. Not then, not ever again. Amala watched it all. Her silence remained, but it had shifted in tone. It was no longer the silence of grief or distance. It had become something deeper, deliberate. Her presence unnerved Catherine, though the woman would never admit it. On several occasions, she attempted to confront the girl, staring her down in the gardens or during Sunday inspections. But Amala never bowed her head, never blinked. The mistress turned away each time with a faint tremor in her jaw. One evening, Catherine summoned the house staff for inspection and noticed a small pouch tied to the neck of the cook, an old woman named Lila who had nursed both Beaumont's sons through fever. When questioned, Lila explained it was a gris-gris for protection. Catherine snatched it and threw it into the hearth, declaring it a vessel of heathen superstition. That night, the kitchen caught fire. No one claimed to know how. After that, the mistress became increasingly erratic. She roamed the halls at night with a lantern, muttering to herself. The servants heard her speaking in tongues no one recognized, half Bible verse, half something else. She began asking questions about Amala. Who was she? What did she do in the fields alone at dusk? Why did the others glance at her before answering anything at all? The drumming returned, this time louder, though no hand struck any surface. It came from the marsh, from the ground, from within the walls of the house. Catherine ordered searches, beatings, vigils. Nothing stopped the sound. One overseer claimed to hear it inside his chest and fell into convulsions the next morning, foaming at the mouth. Still, Amal said nothing. Then came the birds. They began appearing on the windowsills, dead, their necks twisted, eyes gone, always in pairs. Catherine took it as a threat. She called for a preacher, but none would come. The name Beaumont had grown too heavy in the region, too soaked with dread. Whatever had rooted itself in that land had no use for prayer. Amala continued her drawings in the dirt, circles upon circles, spirals broken by slashes. She never looked up, but everyone knew. They were not drawings, they were warnings. There are vows made in churches, sealed with rings and witnessed by men. Then there are oaths made in silence, stitched into the marrow of bone, spoken not with words, but with the weight of unshed tears and breath held too long. Amala made hers in the black hours before dawn, beneath a moon veiled by clouds, with only the stillness of the cane fields to bear witness. By then, Catherine Beaumont's hold over the plantation had deepened like rot beneath painted wood. The music was gone. The laughter was gone. Even the whispering had dimmed to a kind of hollow obedience. The field hands moved like ghosts, their eyes dulled, their hands bloodied by the harvest. But in that silence, something else had begun to stir. Amala had not spoken since her mother's death aboard the slave ship, yet silence did not mean surrender. It was within silence that her ancestors had hidden their tongues from captors, their names from chains, their prayers from the ears of masters. She had learned this art well. Beneath her quiet gaze, something ancient breathed. Late one night, she left her pallet and walked barefoot to the marsh. No one saw her go. No one dared follow. The path was known only to those who had nothing left to lose. She carried 3 things: a piece of red cloth stolen from Catherine's sewing kit, a lock of her own hair, and a shard of bone carved into the shape of an eye. The ritual was not taught in words, it lived in gesture, in blood memory. Her mother's hands had once traced the motions in midair, and though Amale had been only a child, she had watched closely. Now, she remembered every step. Kneeling in the mud, she drew a circle with her finger, whispering without voice the names of those taken. Her tongue remained still, her lips unmoved, but her soul spoke loud enough to rattle the trees. The eye-shaped bone was placed in the center of the circle, the cloth tied around her wrist, her hair buried beneath the roots of a cypress twisted like a spine. Then she pressed her palm to the earth and closed her eyes. In the stillness, the marsh exhaled. Somewhere far off, a drumbeat sounded, not of wood and hide, but of thunder rolling low beneath the skin of the world. The air thickened, leaves trembled without wind, frogs went silent, even the mosquitoes fled. Amale did not move. She listened. A voice, not hers, spoke within her mind, not a voice like a man or woman's, a voice like fire, like salt, like every cry swallowed across the generations. It did not ask for sacrifice, it demanded vengeance, and she, the last daughter of her line, gave it freely. From that moment forward, Amale became a vessel. She returned to the quarters before dawn, eyes shining with a fever that did not break. The others sensed the shift. Children avoided her gaze. Old men muttered prayers they had not spoken since youth. Leela, the cook, began leaving offerings near Amal's door. Dried herbs, black feathers, bones wrapped in cloth. The house slaves averted their eyes, and Catherine noticed. There was a moment, brief and trembling, when the mistress crossed paths with Amale near the stables. No words were exchanged. Catherine flinched, just slightly. Amale did not. That night, the mistress ordered the overseers to search Amale's sleeping space for charms or poisons. They found nothing, but the next morning, the youngest overseer woke with blood pouring from his ears and no memory of the night. Amale said nothing. The silence became unbearable. Catherine began pacing at night. Servants heard her speaking to the walls, to her late husband, to shadows no one else could see. The sound of drums, once faint and fleeting, now echoed through the rafters, not nightly, but hourly, and not always from the marsh. Sometimes it came from beneath the floorboards of the house itself. Still, Amale never spoke. Her vow held, not until the land had tasted justice, not until the drums fell silent on their own. There are languages older than speech, languages of gesture, glance, and rhythm hidden in the bones. On the Beaumont plantation, where song had been strangled and even humming was met with blood, the enslaved spoke in this buried tongue. A flick of the eye, a tilt of the chin, a shift in weight, all became phrases in a grammar born of fear and forged in defiance. Amale became the center of this silent communion. She never ordered, never instructed, yet when she moved, others followed. When she paused in the field and let her fingers brush the top of a cotton boll, others paused too. They would look up, all at once, and see each other not as shadows, but as mirrors. What they saw in Amale was not hope, it was reckoning. By now, the drums were no longer external sounds. They had become internal, an echo in the chest, a pulse that did not match the heartbeat. At first, it drove the workers to unease, then to rhythm. They began to move not with the forced tempo of overseers' commands, but with the pace of something older. When they hoed the rows, when they carried baskets, when they stooped to pick, their motions synchronized like a dance, a slow, ritualized ballet of resistance. The overseers watched, puzzled. The work got done, but the mood shifted. A unity was growing. Mistress Catherine sensed it, though she could not name it. She began referring to Amale as the girl with the dead tongue, and forbade her from the house altogether. When Amale was seen near the kitchen garden, the mistress ordered the herbs pulled out by the roots. When she stood beneath the old pecan tree, Catherine had it chopped down. The tree bled sap like tears. That night, the mistress dreamed of fire. Despite the edicts, Amale's influence spread like smoke. Children began weaving small dolls from cane stalks, their faces blank, their arms crossed over their chests. These were not toys, they were warnings. When Catherine found one placed on her pillow, she burned it and whipped the chambermaid, though the girl swore she had never seen it before. The servants inside the house no longer met her gaze. When she spoke, they answered in fragments, as if distracted by some distant sound. In truth, they were listening to the drums that Catherine still pretended were not real. But they were real. They came from the ground beneath her feet, from the walls she touched, from the eyes of the girl she feared. One morning, Catherine awoke to find red clay smeared across her front steps in a perfect spiral. No tracks led to or from it. No rain had fallen. She demanded it be scrubbed, but within an hour, the clay returned. 3 times it was cleaned. 3 times it returned. The 4th time, it was accompanied by a dead crow, its wings folded neatly across its chest. The preacher finally came, a man sent from Baton Rouge, heavy with cross and scripture. He lasted 1 night. Before dawn, he rode away without speaking to anyone, his hands shaking as he held the reins. Catherine began to unravel. She struck the maids. She starved the cook. She locked her chamber doors at night and nailed shut the windows. She wrote letters to governors and pastors, to scientists and doctors. None replied. No one came. The drums only grew louder, and Amalie danced, not in the way of joy or celebration, but in the way of invocation. Alone in the cane fields under moonlight, her feet moved with impossible grace. Her arms carved shapes into the night air, circles, spirals, cuts. She moved like someone caught between 2 worlds, 1 foot in the soil of Louisiana, the other somewhere ancient, unseen. Those who watched from afar felt both fear and awe. They knew she was not calling upon the past. She was becoming it. The dead have no need for names, only memory. In the old ways, fire was not merely for warmth or punishment. It was a door. And ash, the residue of things undone, became a script through which the living could speak to the unseen. Amalie had waited long enough. The time for silence had passed. The ritual had begun. On the 3rd night after the blood moon, when the fields lay heavy with mist, and even the insects dared not sing, Amalie returned to the marsh. This time, she did not go alone. Not in body, none followed her, but in purpose. Every enslaved soul on the plantation carried some sliver of pain, and that pain traveled with her. In every step she took through the tangled reeds and soft earth, 1,000 untold stories followed. She had gathered the materials over weeks. A charred splinter from the pecan tree Catherine had ordered felled, feathers from the birds that had fallen dead on her windowsills, hair stolen from the mistress's brush, wrapped in red cloth and tied with twine soaked in her own blood. These were not tokens. They were keys. At the water's edge, Amalie drew a wide circle in the mud using the branch. Inside it, she scattered ash taken from the hearth where Lila once cooked food rich with forgotten spices, food Catherine had deemed too wild. The ash had a scent to it, faint, sweet, almost floral. She mixed it with her fingers, daubing symbols onto her forearms, her chest, her brow. Then came the chant, not aloud, never aloud. It rose in her throat like a hum that did not touch the air, a rhythm she felt in her teeth, in the spaces behind her eyes. Her mouth stayed closed, but her body swayed, slow and precise, like a reed in a storm it has already survived. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, as though something ancient had turned its gaze toward her. The trees leaned inward. The air thickened. Time lost its edges. She took the lock of Catherine's hair, held it between both palms, and set it alight with a flame drawn from the lantern she had hidden in the reeds. The fire burned fast, no smoke, no scent. When it was gone, Amalie cast the ashes into the circle. The moment they touched the earth, the drumming returned. Not distant this time, but immediate, overwhelming. It came not from the marsh or the house or the quarters, but from within her. Each beat shook her ribs, drove breath from her lungs, carved patterns behind her eyes. She saw faces, not just of the living, but the dead. Her mother, her mother's mother, and others older still, their names unknown but their eyes familiar. All watching, all waiting. She did not cry. She did not speak. Instead, she reached into the mud and pulled forth a shard of pottery, smooth and black, buried for who knows how long. Upon it, etched in lines so fine they were barely visible, was the same spiral that had haunted Catherine's steps, the same spiral that reappeared on her door each morning. Amal pressed it to her chest and felt the air around her tighten like a drumskin. In the great house, miles away, Catherine woke, screaming. She dreamed of fire, of being trapped beneath floorboards while the house burned above her, her mouth full of ash, her tongue swollen black. The sound of drums pounded against her skull. She tore at her bedsheets until her nails split. At dawn, she found her mirror cracked, though no one had entered. Her hair, once meticulously arranged, was tangled and gray at the roots. Her voice came hoarse and broken. She ordered Amali whipped. The overseers searched the quarters but could not find her. They searched the fields. Nothing. That night, Catherine sat alone in the parlor, surrounded by oil lamps and open Bibles. The air refused to move. The silence was unbearable. Then, softly, from beneath the floor, came the drums, not loud, not violent, but steady, measured, certain. And Catherine, for the first time, wept. At first, they were only heard by her. Catherine Beaumont, mistress of the house, bearer of a name once spoken with weight, now found herself hunted by sound. No one else seemed to hear it, not the maids who scurried through her corridors, nor the overseers who shuffled in her wake. But for her, it was constant, a slow, deliberate thrum, low like a heartbeat, deep like thunder trapped beneath the soil. It began in the walls. She would lie awake, fingers clutching rosary beads worn smooth from use, and listen as the pulse crept up through the floorboards, into the foundation of her bed, across the glass panes of the windows. She stuffed cloth in her ears. She burned incense. She prayed. Still, it came. At dusk, at midnight, at dawn. No pattern, no mercy. She accused the servants first, demanded to know who was hiding drums. No one confessed. Punishments followed. Men were lashed until they bled. Women were made to stand naked in the sun. The children were locked in the tool shed. But the drums did not stop. The others had grown quiet, not with fear, but with focus. A stillness hung over them, not of obedience, but of anticipation. They watched Catherine without blinking. When she passed, heads turned. When she spoke, mouths stayed closed. The plantation was no longer hers. Her health declined. She stopped eating. Her hands trembled when she wrote. Her letters became desperate things, scrawled and stained, begging northern relatives to take her back. No answers came. The name Beaumont no longer opened doors. Rumors had reached Baton Rouge, whispers of madness, of a curse, of a house where even the walls breathed wrong. She brought in a physician, a pale, sweating man who smelled of brandy and rot. He examined her in silence, then muttered about delusions born of climate and left before nightfall. That evening, he was found dead in a ditch 6 miles from the estate, his tongue bitten nearly in half. The drums grew louder. They followed her beyond the house. In the garden, among the rose bushes she once pruned with care, the rhythm pounded beneath her feet. In the chapel, where she tried to kneel and recite scripture, the altar shook with each beat. Even in the bath, submerged in rosewater, the surface rippled with a cadence that came from nowhere. She saw figures now, not fully formed, but hints of shape, of movement. Out of the corner of her eye, someone always watching. In her mirror, shadows moving behind her that vanished when turned upon. Once, she saw a face in the window, a girl, unmoving, eyes wide, mouth stitched closed by nothing visible. She screamed until her voice cracked. No one came. The servants stopped speaking entirely. The plantation echoed only with labor and rhythm, the sound of hoes striking soil, of baskets set down in sync, of feet shuffling in perfect time. Not a note of music was played. Still, it was there. A great, wordless song rising in unison, conducted not by sound, but by something shared. One night, Catherine found red handprints on her bedroom walls, small, childlike, arranged in a circle above her bed. She scrubbed them until her fingers bled. They returned the next morning. She tried to leave, ordered the carriage readied, her bags packed, but when she stepped outside, the horses refused to move. Their eyes rolled white, their bodies trembled. The driver collapsed without cause, froth on his lips. The wheels of the cart splintered as if struck by unseen hands. She never tried again. In the quarters, Amalie reappeared. Just as silently as she had vanished, she returned, walking among the others with the calm of someone who had passed through death and returned with knowledge. Her eyes held no anger, only inevitability. She did not touch anyone. She did not speak. She simply nodded once, and the drums, for the first time, answered back. There are afflictions for which no doctor can prescribe remedy, no preacher can cast out, and no prayer can soothe. By the time Mistress Catherine awoke with her tongue blackened and swollen in her mouth, she had already passed into a realm beyond earthly medicine. She had spent weeks chasing silence, scrubbing walls, burning herbs, screaming into her own hands. But now, silence had turned on her. The drums had taken root in her. It began with a taste, metallic, sharp, and bitter. She awoke in the night, with it clinging to the roof of her mouth. She rinsed with salt water, vinegar, whiskey. Nothing helped. Her voice rasped. Her throat throbbed. The following morning, her tongue had darkened at the edges. A physician was summoned from New Orleans. He examined her by candlelight, frowning as he peeled back her lips and prodded the discolored flesh. He asked if she had eaten spoiled meat, or perhaps swallowed coal. She shook her head. When he suggested it might be a disease of the blood, her expression turned to rage. "This is not disease," she whispered. "It is punishment." He laughed, nervously. By evening, he was gone, leaving behind only the smell of laudanum and a single silver scalpel, which Catherine kept beside her bed. Her condition worsened. By the third day, her tongue had blackened entirely, soot-colored and cracked like scorched earth. Speech became agony. Her words came out as gurgles, slurred and wet, echoing like broken bells. She took to writing her commands, but even her handwriting had changed, trembling, angular, as if guided by a hand not entirely her own. Amalie's name appeared again and again in her notes, underlined, circled, scrawled in the margins. By then, Amalie had resumed her work in the fields as if nothing had changed. Her movements were slow, methodical, sacred. She no longer hid her rituals. At dusk, she stood among the cane, lifting her arms to the sky in silence, the others surrounding her like sentinels. No words passed between them, none were needed. They all heard the drums now. Catherine watched from the window, her eyes sunken, her teeth clenched against the pane in her mouth. She could not speak. She could only watch as her authority dissolved beneath her feet like salt in rain. Even the house itself seemed to reject her. Doors jammed. Lamps blew out. Water turned black in the basins. One evening, she scrawled a note and handed it to the maid. It read, "Bring me Amalie." The maid took the note and left, but Amalie never came. Instead, a small clay bowl was left at Catherine's door. Inside it, ash, black feathers, and a single sliver of bone carved into the shape of a tongue. Catherine fainted. When she awoke, her bed was soaked in sweat. Her ears rang with the sound of drums, steady, relentless, as if her own blood were pounding out a beat. She stumbled to the mirror and found her reflection foreign. Her face was pale, drawn tight over bone. Her tongue, protruding involuntarily from her lips, now bore cracks that glowed faintly in the dark. She clawed at it, tore it, bit until blood spilled onto her nightgown, but it would not stop growing. It thickened each night, filling her mouth until breathing became labor. She tried to write again, to beg the overseers to kill her. Her fingers no longer obeyed. She began to convulse. The cook found her on the floor, eyes rolled back, limbs twisted. They carried her to bed, laid her down, and waited. No one fetched a doctor. No one prayed. Amalie stood at the foot of the stairs, watching. The mistress's mouth opened one final time. No sound came out, only the echo of a drumbeat, slow and certain, thrumming from within her ruined throat. In the final days of her unraveling, Catherine Beaumont became obsessed with fire. She wandered the halls with oil lamps clutched tight to her chest, trailing the scent of kerosene and scorched fabric. The housemaids whispered that she had taken to burning her own clothes, dresses turned to ash, lace gloves melted into black strings. She lit candles in every room, dozens at a time, until the air shimmered with heat and smoke. Her skin broke out in welts from the heat, but she did not care. Fire, she believed, was the only thing left that could purify the evil pressing in from all sides. One morning, she stood barefoot in the parlor, her blackened tongue protruding slightly between cracked lips, and ordered a bonfire. Not just any fire, a cleansing. She demanded every item that had ever touched Amali be brought forward: bedding, garments, wooden utensils, combs, even the worn leather shoes she'd once stepped over in the quarters. Everything that bore the girl's scent, her touch, her memory. The overseers hesitated, but her glare, hollow and wild, brooked no delay. By dusk, a great pile stood in the yard, a crooked mountain of fabric, straw, carved tokens, and broken tools. Atop it all, Catherine placed a bundle of hair, bound in red thread, the same bundle Amali had cut from her own scalp during the ritual. The mistress lit the fire herself, striking match after match with trembling hands until the base caught. Flames rose quickly, greedy and orange, licking the sky. The smoke rolled in strange spirals. It did not rise but circled, moving against the wind. It carried a smell that was not entirely of burning cloth or wood, something older, pungent, metallic. The enslaved stood at a distance, silent and unmoving. They did not look at Catherine. They looked at the fire, and the fire seemed to look back. Then came the sound. Not a drumbeat this time, but a high, keening wail, thin and piercing like metal against bone. It emerged from the blaze, too human to be wind, too wild to be anything else. Catherine fell to her knees, clutching her ears, mouth wide in a wordless scream. Her tongue, now bloated and split, hung like a dark flag. She tried to rise. Her legs buckled. The fire hissed and spat. Something in the pile exploded, a burst of sparks and smoke, and when it cleared, a mirror was standing upright in the ashes. It had not been there before. A tall, warped looking-glass with a cracked edge and a frame blackened by soot. Its surface rippled like water, yet reflected nothing. Catherine crawled toward it, weeping through clenched teeth. Her reflection did not appear. Instead, she saw movement, shapes passing behind the glass, indistinct and slow. One figure stepped forward, a woman, dark-skinned, eyes closed, mouth stitched, Amala. But not as she was now, something else, something more. Catherine screamed again, but the sound caught in her throat. Blood spilled down her chin. The mirror pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and then cracked down the center. The fire died in an instant. Smoke sucked inward, leaving nothing but cold air and silence. Amali stood at the edge of the field, arms at her sides. She had not moved during the fire, had not blinked, had not spoken. She turned and walked away, barefoot in the dirt, leaving no prints. Catherine lay in the ashes, face down, shaking. Her hands clawed at the earth. Her tongue, black as coal, lolled from her mouth and lay heavy in the dust. No one touched her. No one spoke. The house behind her creaked once, as if exhaling. Then all was still. They found her the next morning as the sun bled over the cane fields, face down in the courtyard, arms twisted beneath her, legs sprawled like a marionette with its strings cut. Catherine Beaumont, mistress of the estate, once draped in silks and authority, now lay in a simple cotton shift, soaked through with night sweat and ash. Her mouth gaped open. Her eyes, rimmed red, were frozen in a wide, unseeing stare. Her tongue had fallen from her mouth. It lay beside her cheek, dark as dried plum flesh, cracked and shriveled, like something torn from a root. No blood surrounded it, only dust. Her face had stiffened into an expression that no one could quite name, something between awe and terror, as if she had seen a god and found it less forgiving than expected. No one screamed, no one wept. The field hands gathered slowly. No overseer called them. No bell rang. One by one, they emerged from the quarters and stood in a wide arc around her body, watching in stillness. The air was thick, not with grief, but with finality. Even the birds remained silent. No prayers were said. It was Lila, the cook, who finally stepped forward. She knelt, not to touch the corpse, but to place a palm flat against the earth. A slow nod. Then she rose and returned to the quarters. The others followed. Not a word was spoken. Amali was gone. Her pallet untouched. Her few belongings, wooden beads, dried roots, a bundle of cloth, arranged with care. No one had seen her leave. No tracks led from her door. Yet all understood. She had not fled. She had been released. For days, the house stood untouched. None of the slaves dared enter. The overseers kept to their cabins. No new orders came. No one stepped forward to claim authority. And in that vacuum, the land exhaled. The air grew lighter. The drums ceased. But at night, something else took their place. Not sound, but sensation. A pulse in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes. Dreams returned to those who had long been too exhausted to dream. Dreams of the marsh, of circles drawn in ash, of ancestors standing in rows with mouths sewn shut, pointing toward the house. Within a week, the estate was abandoned. Word spread fast. The Beaumont place was cursed. The crops withered. The well turned black. The horses refused to be ridden. Even the wind seemed to carry whispers. Attempts to sell the land failed. No buyers, no tenants, only stories. Stories of a girl who never spoke but heard everything. Stories of a mistress found with her tongue rotted from her mouth. Stories of the drums and the silence that followed them. They say if you walk the fields at night, barefoot and quiet, you can feel her passing beside you. Not as a ghost, but as something older. Not vengeful, only watching. A sentinel of memory. A guardian of pain. Some have claimed to see her in photographs that should not exist. A blur in the background. A shadow among the reeds. A face half lit at the edge of the frame. They say the drums are still buried in the land, waiting, and that the silence of bare feet means they've already begun. Decades passed. The world outside changed. Railroads carved through forests. War came and went, leaving behind new flags and false promises. The whip no longer cracked in open fields, and men once counted as property now walked, at least in law, as free. But in the shadowed folds of Louisiana's forgotten places, memory lingered like rot in the floorboards. The Beaumont plantation remained untouched. Vines overtook the main house, curling through windows like fingers reclaiming what was stolen. The roof sagged under the weight of seasons. Shutters hung crooked, doors bloated with damp, walls split by the breath of roots pushing up from beneath. But no one came to tear it down. No one dared. Locals kept their distance. Even the boldest hunters avoided the land. Those who ventured near spoke of sudden chills, of voices that seemed to echo from the cane fields, though the stalks were long gone. Children dared each other to approach the gates, but never crossed them. The bravest returned pale and silent, refusing to speak of what they'd seen or heard. In 1894, a photographer named Ellery Thorne arrived with ambition and arrogance packed in equal measure. He had heard the stories, dismissed them as superstition, and came seeking beauty in ruin. With a cumbersome tripod and black cloth, he set his lens on the house at dusk, trying to capture the solemn majesty of decay. The first plate came out blank. The second showed only a blur, as if something had moved across the lens too fast to see. In the third, behind the shattered window of the upper parlor, there was a face, not fully formed, only the impression of eyes, wide and dark, and a mouth that seemed sewn shut by shadow. When he developed the photograph, he vomited in the basin beside his tent. He burned the negatives that night and left before sunrise, abandoning his equipment beneath the trees. The plate survives. It passed hands in secret, eventually winding up in the possession of a professor of folklore who claimed it was a rare glimpse into the residue of pain. He kept it locked in a drawer and refused to speak of it. The drawer was later found empty. No sign of break-in, no trace of the image. Still, the stories continued. Travelers along the nearby roads reported hearing drums beneath their wheels, faint at first, then louder, synchronized with the rhythm of their own breath. A surveyor swore he saw footprints in the dry earth, bare, small, leading toward the house, then disappearing entirely. No entry, no exit. No one could say what truly happened that night in 1856 when Catherine Beaumont died and Amale vanished. The official record lists only a linguistic affliction and mental derangement, followed by the abandonment of the property. But the elders, those who remember in their bones rather than books, tell it differently. They say the house remembers. They say the drums are not gone, only buried beneath years of silence. They say Amale did not die. Not really. She became part of the land itself, stitched into the roots, the water, the walls, a guardian, not of vengeance, but of memory, a watcher in the dark, ensuring that what was taken is never forgotten. And when the wind turns cold, when the air grows still, you might hear it, that low, patient rhythm, the warning, the morning beat.